All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Martin Muldoon. As I mentioned, I'm Director of Product Marketing at BeInsight, and I would like to just give a quick blurb on who BeInsight is. I know how much people dread corporate overviews, so I'm going to blow through this pretty quickly. But BeInsight we're based in New York, in Manhattan, and we are Microsoft's go-to partner for advanced search solutions. We're an ISV, which is to say we're a product company. We've been in business since 2004, and we have about 2.5 million users worldwide. Obviously, that sounds like a large number, but we have some very, very large customers like Accenture with 190,000 employees, ExxonMobil 85,000, so on and so forth, so that number can quickly grow. But again, we are Microsoft's key partner in the search space. Let's see here, what would be interested? We're a Microsoft managed partner. We're also an MTC Global Alliance partner. The MTCs, if you're not familiar with them, are Microsoft Technology Centers. These are facilities where Microsoft showcases their technologies, and they're actually been kind enough to bring our technology in, and it's being showcased there as well. I believe the number keeps growing, but there might be 20 of these worldwide. Another interesting factor, I hope it's interesting, is the former senior product manager for Microsoft Enterprise Search, Jeff Reed, has now joined our team as Indeed. So in terms of my presentation today, my goal today is to convince you that if you're deploying search, you should include line of business systems in the scope of your project. This obviously raises a number of questions, and the first of which is, why in the world would I want to do that? And why connect into these systems and surface data through SharePoint or Fast Search? And the answer to this question is that if you do, the chances that you have a successful search initiative is simply far greater. Enterprise search is different than other types of technology infrastructure. Just as an example, take Microsoft Exchange. If you deploy Exchange on time and on budget, the project is clearly a success. No one would argue that. But search is a bit different. Even if you deploy on time and on budget and you get everything right, it doesn't necessarily mean the project was successful, because if people don't like the tool, they simply stop using it. And there's not going to be a call to the help desk. The success of a search initiative is driven by use. And unlike Exchange or Active Directory, people don't have to use it. So it's very, very important to make people happy to get the highest return on your investment. And if you don't connect into line of business systems, you're only going to have half the company using enterprise search. And that statistic might be great in baseball, but for an enterprise search initiative, that project is going to have some trouble. So anyway, there's another question that begs to be asked here. All these systems on the screen have search systems embedded in them, so why not just use those? And the answer, it's very simple. The answer is that the search systems embedded in SAP, for example, are just quite poor. Just not to pick on SAP, but they've been saying they're going to fix it over the last 10 years, and they haven't. And people just they find it very, very difficult to find the information that they're looking for. And there's a reason for this. Basically, search is not core business for these vendors. They're simply not willing to make the investments needed to provide a world-class search platform or technology. And in contrast, as you probably know if you follow search at all, Microsoft spent $1.2 billion back in 2008 to acquire Fast Search and Transfer, which was best-in-class search technology at that time. So search is clearly strategic to them. And there's a reason for that as well. If I may switch to the next slide here, just a little history lesson to put all this in context. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Gartner, the analyst firm, and their Magic Quadrants. Back in 2006, the Magic Quadrant for enterprise search, I'm sure it's very hard to see on this screen, but if you had the time, you'd notice that Microsoft's not even on it. But if towards the top of that screen, 2006, you'll notice that Google, they released a product back in 2002 called the Google Search Appliance. They were making some real deep inroads into enterprises. And back in 2006, they were about to enter the leader quadrant in enterprise search. And this really shook Microsoft up. They really woke up at this point. And they stated publicly search is now strategic to them. And what's really amazing here, if you look at the quadrant from 2008, in a very, very short period of time, Microsoft had moved into the leadership position. Again, part of that is due to the acquisition of Fast Search and Transfer, but it's quite incredible what they've managed to achieve in such a short period of time. But the key message here is simply that search is strategic to Microsoft. They're going to continue to invest heavily in it. So back to connectors and another question. If Microsoft has all this great search technology, why aren't they connecting into these systems? And it's a good question. I mean, basically, out of the box, Microsoft provides connectors into a handful of systems: SharePoint, file systems, websites, and Exchange public folders. And obviously, the question is, why don't they provide more connectors? And there are really two answers to this. The first is they really don't want you to connect into these systems. Let's be honest about this. What they would like is for you to migrate the data into these systems, into SharePoint, and literally retire them. Microsoft is pretty competitive, as we all know. But there's a second reason which I think is more interesting, and that's the fact that connector technology is extremely complicated. I'm going to spend some time explaining why that is the case. All of these different systems have nuances and so on and so forth that have to be dealt with. So rather than build connectors themselves, Microsoft provides a connector framework called Business Connectivity Services, and it's called BCS for short. So this is designed for developing connectors into all the systems you see on the screen there. But before you even consider running off and trying to build a connector, what I'd like to do here now is impress upon you just how complex it is, and that's what my next slide will hopefully do. And what you're seeing on the screen now, on the left, is basically a depiction of SharePoint. Again, SharePoint, you can basically serve up content both through search or through other means, through document libraries and lists and things of that sort. Now, on the right-hand side of the screen, I just have a handful of representative systems. And the question is, what does it take to connect into these back-end systems? You'll often see Microsoft give demonstrations of BCS where they're connecting into systems where scalability and security are really not issues, and that's fine. BCS can do that. It does it very, very well. But the point here today is we're talking about connecting into enterprise systems where security and scale is critically important. And I guess I'll reference SAP as I go through this because we all know it's such a monster. It's 47,000 tables. It's just something else. So what are the components of a connector? Well, the first, and everything I'm saying here today applies only from a search context. You can build connectors into a system where you're just requesting, a user is requesting vendor information. Search is a bit different, and I'm going to explain why. The first thing is you have to build a new API into the target system because the APIs that are provided for are not designed for search. Again, going back to that example, if a user requests a vendor, SAP has an API for that. You can easily request that type of information. Search is different in the sense search goes in, its job is to go in and basically pull every single record as fast as it possibly can. In addition to that, what's different is any security protecting that record also gets pulled, and this gets stored in the index so that when you run a query, if a record is relevant to your query, it'll look to see the credentials on that to see if you have access, and that'll be served up to you if you do. So it's very, very different, and what is needed here is what we call a search-optimized API. But once that's accomplished, you then have to concern yourself with security. Security is a huge problem here, and I'll explain why. SharePoint and FAST only understand Active Directory users and groups. That's it. When you log in the morning, it knows who you are based on your Active Directory credentials. Now, when SharePoint or FAST indexes information in SAP and it comes across, each record is not protected by an Active Directory user or group. It's protected by an SAP user or group. So it doesn't have a clue what to do with that. So if it were to index that information and you were to run a query, basically if that a particular record is protected by an SAP user or group, it doesn't know what to do with that. and you could potentially be served up information that you don't have access to see. So the answer to this is simple. Everyone knows what it is. You have to create a map between Active Directory users and groups and those in the target system. So for example, if in Active Directory my username is M. Muldoon, my first initial last name, but in SAP it's Martin _Muldoon, the map, it's simply, I'll show you the technology, but it's a simple matter of saying I want to take the first initial of the SAP user, everything after the underscore, and concatenate it. That's the Active Directory equivalent. So this map, that's exactly what happens. The connector, when it comes across an SAP user, it will look to the map, translate it. That's what gets stored in the index. So you'll be served up information that only you have access to see. Now, a changelog is necessary for scalability reasons. Basically, again, part of the problem with a search engine is it has no regard for the stress on a system at a given point in time. I have something of an ERP background. When a user runs a report on an ERP system, the report just doesn't run. It gets queued up until resources are freed up, and then it'll run. Well, a search engine has no regard for that. It just goes in, starts pulling information as fast as it possibly can. And this can cause the system to crash, quite easily, in fact. So the way that what needs to be done here is, this is the way that BA Insight approaches it, is we create a changelog. This keeps track of everything that has changed since the last crawl. So basically, when the connector goes in to crawl all of this information, it first looks to the log, and it will only pull that information that has changed. And that represents a percentage of the overall content. And this really shields the target system, the enterprise system, from an incredible amount of abuse, quite frankly. Now, those of you that know anything about search know that there's something called an incremental crawl. This is different. In an incremental crawl, it'll check the timestamp on a record to see if it needs to be, if it's changed, and pull that. The problem with an incremental crawl is it has to go through every single record to check that timestamp. So it really still creates quite a bit of disk activity, and it can bring down the system quite easily. So the changelog is a different approach and one that's quite scalable. Now, metadata enrichment simply means that as information is being crawled, you want to have control over it to enrich it. A simple example, if you're crawling a product catalog and the colors of the product, it's abbreviated, RGB for red, green, blue, you don't want that to be stored in the index because you can change data, enrich it. And I'll show you that our approach, we have a series of connectors. We have a graphic user interface that lets you do that quite easily. And finally, targets is another capability of connectors. You want to have the ability to push, after you've connected and you've achieved all this stuff with a search optimized API, you've mapped security, and you have access to that information, well, you want to basically be able to target whatever you want with that information. You might want to put it into the search index so people can search it, or perhaps you simply want to target a list, or perhaps you're connecting into an ERP system that has HR data in it, and you want to improve the profiles, the information describing your employees. With that information, you should be able to target that the My Site profiles, and that's the notion of a target. So in our view, these are the key elements of a connector, and again, it is quite complicated, and I do want to say that naturally we feel quite strongly about the importance of connectors. It's a key element of a successful search initiative, and we've invested heavily over the years to develop these connectors into all line of business systems, and that includes ERP systems, CRM systems, ECM systems, or even messaging systems such as Lotus Notes. But with that, why don't I show you very quickly a connector in action. One of our most popular connectors, believe it or not, is Exchange Private Email. Now, here comes another question. Why in the world would I want to have SharePoint or Fast crawl individual mailboxes when I can just search my mailbox in Outlook? And it's a great question. The answer is we often see this being deployed for compliance reasons or e-discovery reasons. If an organization gets slapped with a lawsuit, they obviously have to provide information to the court that relevant to that case. Now, in the case of email, much of that, if a company has the benefit of archival systems, it'll be in the archive system. And they'll have some means by which they can search that. But what about the existing Exchange email? Companies want to have the ability to search that. And basically, they want to do so when you're talking about millions upon millions of emails with attachments all over the place. You have to do this very efficiently and effectively. So that's what I'll show you now, our approach. We have a front end into all of this. Yeah, here we are. And let me just go into a full screen mode for you. So now in this particular case, this is a SharePoint 2010 search interface. And I'm running a search here, and you'll notice some emails are coming up. And in fact, let me filter on email so it's a bit clearer. But of course, the only reason this email is appearing here is because I've connected into it. So when I click on this email, what happens next is we have a number of connectors as one product line. We have an advanced UI as a second. So this will give you a chance to see the UI. So when I click on this now, what happens is our UI will come up and it will present a preview of that particular email. And it's much more impressive when we search against larger files and so on and so forth, but this is just a one-pager. But you'll see when I go into a full screen mode, there's additional capability that the UI is providing. Over here on the top left, we have we see that this particular email, the .msg, has 3 document attachments. And basically the attachments, I can search inside those attachments. I'll show you that in just a moment. But beneath that, we have our query terms. And the terms I ran in my query were Microsoft, SharePoint, Government. You'll soon see that the colors here correspond to hit highlight colors. The reason there are no hits on this email is exactly that. There are no hits. The reason this was relevant to my query was the fact that the hits are all occurring within the attachments. Now, beneath that is something we call a hit map. This is a graphic representation of where those hits reside. And the value of the hit map is at a glance. I can tell what's relevant to me or not. As an example, I see immediately the center attachment here, SPS Press Pass, is the only document that's relevant to me, the only attachment, because it's the only one with the 3 colors. The 3 colors represent the term Microsoft, SharePoint, Government. Now, when I click on this, I'm going to get an exploded view of that attachment. I get to see inside it. And I immediately see it's a 7-page attachment. And basically, again, that value, I see immediately that only 2 pages are relevant, page 3 and page 1. And I can jump right to those pages by clicking on any of these bars, like so. And again, all this occurs without having to download or whatever, open up the email, fish through attachments. And here you can see what I was talking about earlier, the hit highlighting. The query terms, Microsoft in red, SharePoint in tan, Government in green. And then another thing I wanted to mention is that with this search inside capability, you can continue to drill inside this document. So for example, you see the term communications here in the title. Let me just search on that just so you can see it. It certainly does work. And when I run that, of course, it finds it. It's highlighted. You'll see over here on the left, it's been added to my list of query terms. And we see that in the 3 attachments, there are 14 hits. And again, I can jump to those, page 4, for example. And another very useful thing, particularly when it comes to discovery, is the fact that we stem. I searched on the term communications, and you'll notice that the term communicate was found as well, as it should. It's a root of the term communications. So very important. And the last point to be made here is that basically, just in the context of this one example, I guess I'm getting off connectors here, but when you find relevant content, you want to have the ability to save it off or do something with it, and we provide that. For example, if this was relevant to, or I thought it might be relevant to the lawsuit, I can add it to a workspace over here on the right for further review. And let me just show you what that workspace looks like. And here it is. And you'll notice there are 3 items in here. Forgive me. This is leftovers from a demo I did earlier this morning. But let's see. This is the one I just added. Microsoft SharePoint communications. So anyway, let me get back to the topic of connectors. I just wanted to show you one last thing, which is how we configure our connectors. That might be of some interest. And since we're on the topic of Exchange, I'll show you our Exchange connector. Let's see here. Okay, so this is basically a graphic user interface we use to manage connectors. But at the end of the day, I do want to emphasize it's all based on Microsoft's technology. The fancy term is it's a protocol handler. But here, towards the bottom, we have our Exchange connector. And in terms of configuring it, Exchange is simple because it is Active Directory based. There are no security mappings or anything like that. So it's simply a matter, if I can bring it up here, of connecting, enabling, or empowering the, providing an account that is used for the search engine to access the Exchange information. Another thing we do, we learned this the hard way. Basically, the older models of Exchange are quite fragile, and when they're indexed, again, they can crash. So the number of threads you can have working or indexing parallel to one another is limited on the older versions, whereas on 2010 it's a bit more robust. So your selection here is very, very important. Let me just see. Yeah, here we're simply specifying Active Directory information. The content section is much more interesting, so let me jump to that. This is where you specify what mailboxes you want to include. Here, on this particular panel, you're specifying your crawl schedules. When do you want it to crawl? The crawl starting point is a matter of basically how far back do you want to go. Do you just want to crawl items from 6 months ago? Perhaps this rogue employee joined the employee, some rogue employee sends out information he or she should not have, and you're looking to track down that person and all his email. Well, you don't have to crawl everything. You just want to go back to the first of the year. You could specify that here. Here you're specifying what it is you're looking to index: contacts, tasks, events, notes. Do you want to include sent items, deleted items, junk mail, and so on and so forth? A very powerful capability is this filter script. This gives you the ability through scripting to get even more granular through VB.net. You can script away, and it will compile it for performance reasons. You'll be able to really get, in terms of what's indexed, you can get down to a really granular level.
Thank you for listening to a highlighted segment of SharePoint ShopTalk. Join us live and ask your own questions every Thursday, 12:30 to 1:30 p.m. You may also join our group on LinkedIn at SharePoint ShopTalk. That's our group name. And we hope that you can join us. We look forward to the continued sharing of SharePoint knowledge.